What if the thing you've been calling your greatest weakness is actually your most direct line to the divine? Carl Jung discovered something that shook the foundations of both psychology and religion. He found that addiction is not merely a disease or a moral failing, it is a spiritual emergency, a crisis of the soul that only visits those marked for profound awakening. While society teaches you to hide your struggles in shame, Jung saw something entirely different. He recognized that certain souls carry a burden unknown to ordinary people, a restlessness so intense it cannot be ignored, a hunger so deep it threatens to consume everything. And he understood that this was not accidental. This was selection. You see, not everyone becomes addicted. Not everyone loses control. Not everyone finds themselves trapped in cycles they swore they would never repeat. The majority can drink socially, gamble occasionally, indulge moderately, and walk away unscathed. But you cannot, and that difference, that inability to find peace where others find ease, is not evidence of your weakness, it is evidence of your calling. God does not speak to everyone through fire. Most people receive gentle whispers, quiet intuitions, comfortable confirmations, but the chosen ones, those destined for radical transformation, they receive something else entirely. They receive the storm, the chaos, the uncontrollable force that shatters every illusion they've built about who they are and who they're supposed to be. Your addiction is that storm. And within it, if you listen carefully enough, you can hear the voice that has been trying to reach you all along. Most people exist in a kind of waking sleep. They move through life, following invisible scripts, believing what they're told to believe, wanting what they're told to want. They never question the foundations because the foundations never shake. They are comfortable. And comfort is the greatest anesthetic against awakening. But your life has been shaken. The ground beneath you keeps crumbling. Every time you think you've found solid footing, the addiction pulls you under again. And this repeated destruction, this constant dismantling of everything you try to build, is not random. It is deliberate. Think about the great spiritual figures throughout history. None of them found enlightenment through ease and prosperity. They found it through suffering, through wilderness, through nights so dark they thought they would never see light again. They were forced into territories of consciousness that comfortable people never visit. And it was precisely this forced descent that made their eventual awakening possible. You did not choose this path any more than they did. Addiction arrived in your life uninvited and has refused to leave. Every attempt to evict it, every promise to yourself that you would stop, every moment of desperate resistance has only proven one thing. This force is more powerful than your willpower. This hunger runs deeper than your discipline. This need is more fundamental than your understanding, and that is exactly the lesson. God speaks most clearly when all other voices have been silenced. He reaches you most directly when every other door has been closed. Your addiction has systematically destroyed every false refuge, every comfortable illusion, every strategy you use to avoid the confrontation your soul actually needs. Jung called this journey individuation, the path toward becoming your authentic self. But he understood that most people never begin because they never have to. They remain comfortable in their personas, their social masks, their acceptable identities. Surface-level answers continue to satisfy them, so they never dig deeper. But you are not like them. You were given a hunger that nothing ordinary can touch. You were marked with a need so profound that the entire world feels too small to contain it. And this need has driven you to your knees again and again, forcing you to acknowledge that something is fundamentally wrong with the way you've been living. This is God refusing to let you settle. This is the universe insisting you were made for something more. And while it feels like punishment, while it looks like destruction, Jung saw it as invitation, a summons you could not refuse, a path laid specifically for you, whether you wanted to walk it or not. Some souls require thunder to wake them. Gentle whispers would never be enough. And if you carry an addiction, you are one of these souls. Jung observed that addicts live in extremes. They feel too much, need too much, want too much. Where others experience mild preferences, they experience consuming obsessions. Where others feel passing sadness, they know devastating despair. Where others sense gentle joy, they touch ecstatic heights. Nothing about their inner world is moderate. Everything is amplified. This intensity exhausts you. It makes normal life feel impossible. While others seem content with simple pleasures and modest goals, you feel like you're suffocating. You need more, something that matches the magnitude of what burns inside you. And when you cannot find it through healthy means, you find it through destructive ones. But here's what Jung understood. This intensity is not a flaw in your design. It is the design. You were built to feel things at this level because you were built for experiences that ordinary consciousness cannot reach. Your nervous system is tuned to frequencies most people will never detect. Your soul is calibrated for depths most people will never explore. The addiction is what happens when this instrument, this capacity for extreme experience, gets pointed in the wrong direction. You have a high-performance engine, but nobody gave you the manual. You have access to expanded states of consciousness, but nobody provided the map. So you crash again and again. Because the power that could take you to extraordinary heights is instead slamming you into walls every time you chase that high, every time you seek that escape, every time you reach for your substance or behavior of choice. You are responding to something legitimate. You are answering a real call, a genuine need, an authentic hunger. The problem is not the hunger. The problem is that you've been feeding it poison instead of nourishment. Jung spent years studying mystical traditions across cultures, and he found something fascinating. The language mystics use to describe spiritual experiences is almost identical to the language addicts use to describe their addiction. Both speak of overwhelming need, of something beyond themselves, taking control, of moments where the ordinary self dissolves and something larger moves through them. The mystic and the addict are reaching for the same thing. Both are trying to transcend the limited ego, to touch something infinite, to escape the prison of mundane consciousness. The only difference is direction. The mystic finds a path that leads to liberation. The addict finds a path that leads to change. But the impulse, the original hunger, is the same. This is why Jung wrote to the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous that alcoholism was the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed as the craving for spirits. He used the Latin phrase spiritus contra spiritum, spirit against spirits. The solution to addiction is not the absence of the craving, but the redirection of it towards something that can actually satisfy. You cannot think your way out of this because it is not a problem of the mind. You cannot discipline your way out because it is not a problem of will. You can only transform it by understanding what you actually hunger for and then finding where that hunger can truly be fed. But that requires going deeper than you've ever gone. And addiction is what forces you there. You have built a personality over the years, a carefully constructed version of yourself that you show to the world. It is designed to win approval, avoid rejection, maintain acceptability. For most people, this constructed self is enough. They live their entire lives inside this persona and never suspect there is anything beneath it. But your addiction will not let you hide there. It keeps dragging you down beneath the surface into the messy, unacceptable regions of your psyche that you've spent years denying. Every time you act out, every time you lose control, every time you do the thing you swore you would never do again, you are being forced to confront parts of yourself you've rejected. Jung called this shadow work. He considered it essential for true development. But most people avoid it completely because it is terrifying. It requires looking at the ugliest parts of yourself, the parts that contradict your self-image, the parts that prove you are not who you pretend to be. Your addiction makes avoidance impossible. It keeps producing evidence you cannot deny. It reveals desires you've tried to bury. It demonstrates that beneath your polished exterior lies someone you don't fully recognize, someone with needs and impulses that frighten you. And here is the profound part. These shadow aspects that terrify you are not evil. They are not proof of corruption. They are simply human. They are the natural, instinctual, uncivilized parts of your being that civilization taught you to suppress. But suppression does not eliminate anything. It only drives it underground, where it gains power in the darkness. And eventually, it erupts through addiction, through compulsion, through behaviors you cannot understand or control. What you refuse to acknowledge consciously will eventually control you unconsciously. Jung discovered that the only path forward is through acceptance. Not acceptance of the destructive behavior, but acceptance of the needs beneath it. Acceptance of the anger you were taught to hide. Acceptance of the desires you were taught to be ashamed of. Acceptance of the weakness you were taught to deny. Acceptance of the full, contradictory reality of who you actually are. This descent into truth is excruciating. It means admitting things about yourself you've spent your life trying to disprove. It means confessing needs you've labeled shameful. It means acknowledging desires that contradict your values. It means seeing yourself clearly, without filters of judgment or justification. But this is exactly where transformation becomes possible. You cannot change what you refuse to face. You cannot heal what you will not acknowledge. You cannot integrate what you continue to reject. The very parts you've been fighting are the parts that hold the key to your freedom. Your addiction has been forcing this confrontation all along. Every relapse is another invitation to look deeper, to stop pretending, to get honest about what is actually happening inside you. And while it feels like failure, Jung understood it differently. He saw it as the breaking down of false structures, the dismantling of lies, the clearing away of everything that is not authentically you. This is the descent. It is painful, humiliating, and necessary. Because only when you reach the bottom, only when every pretense has been stripped away, only when you are standing naked before yourself, can the real work begin. Jung studied an ancient art called alchemy. Most people think of it as primitive chemistry, attempts to turn lead into gold. But Jung recognized it as something deeper, a symbolic system for describing psychological and spiritual transformation. And at its heart was a principle. Nothing can be transformed until it is first broken down completely. The alchemists called this stage Nigredo, the blackening, the death, the dissolution. It is the necessary destruction that precedes all creation. And Jung saw this same pattern in every person who overcomes addiction. You have been in the Nigredo. You have been in the darkness where everything falls apart, where nothing works anymore, where the person you thought you were dissolves. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Something new cannot be born until something old dies. Every moment of your suffering has been refinement. Every failure has been education. Every loss has been preparation. You are being broken down, not to destroy you, but to remake you into something stronger, something truer, something capable of bearing the weight of your actual purpose. Jung believed that suffering was the primary catalyst for consciousness. Comfort keeps us asleep. Pain wakes us up. And those who suffer most intensely have the opportunity to become most awake. Not because suffering is good, but because it forces us to ask questions we would otherwise never ask. Why am I here? What is the meaning of all this? Who am I beneath all the roles I play? These questions do not arise during pleasure and satisfaction. They arise in darkness, in confusion, in moments when everything we thought we knew proves insufficient. Your addiction has delivered you to these questions. It has stripped away every easy answer, every comfortable belief, every shallow explanation. And now you stand in the space where real wisdom becomes possible, the space of not knowing, of being broken open, of having nothing left to lose. This is where alchemy happens, not in the victories, but in the devastation. Because this is where you stop relying on your own strength and start reaching for something greater. This is where you admit you cannot fix yourself and begin asking for help from sources you previously ignored. God shows up most clearly in the ruins. He arrives when everything else has failed. And for those marked by addiction, the ruins are necessary. They are the location where the divine encounter happens, where transformation becomes not just possible but inevitable. The suffering follows patterns, rhythms, cycles that Jung recognized as deeply meaningful. You fall, but you rise. You break, but you heal. You die, but you are reborn. And each cycle takes you deeper, peels away another layer, removes another illusion, brings you closer to the core of who you actually are. This is the alchemy. It is brutal and it is beautiful. It transforms lead into gold, darkness into light, addiction into awakening. But you cannot rush it. You cannot skip steps. You must let the fire do its work. Let the dissolution complete itself. Let the death be thorough enough that the resurrection becomes real. And then something shifts. The descent ends. The return begins. Not because the pain stops, but because your relationship to the pain transforms. In every hero's journey, there comes a moment when the direction changes. When the one who descended into the underworld begins the climb back toward the light, not as the same person who went down, but as someone fundamentally altered by what they've seen and survived. Jung observed that those who successfully navigate addiction emerge carrying something precious, medicine. Not the kind in bottles or prescriptions, but the kind that can only be extracted from lived experience. They have been to places most people will never go, survived things most people could not survive, learned truths most people will never discover. This medicine is desperately needed. The world is full of people suffering in silent desperation, convinced they are alone, certain that nobody could understand, but you understand. You have walked through the same fires. You have faced the same demons. You know the territory. This is why you were chosen, not for your sake alone, but for everyone who will cross your path in the future. Every moment of suffering was preparing you to recognize suffering in others. Every descent into darkness was training you to sit with others in theirs. Every time you thought you were being destroyed, you were actually being equipped. But you cannot offer this medicine while you are still trapped. You cannot guide others while you remain imprisoned. The return requires that you actually complete the transformation, that you integrate the lessons, that you emerge changed rather than merely damaged. This is the critical shift Jung identified. From being controlled by the addiction to understanding it, from being a victim of your compulsions to being a student of them, from fighting what you feel to investigating what it means. When you make this shift, everything changes. The craving does not necessarily disappear, but it loses its power. You can feel it, observe it, understand it without automatically obeying it. You gain space between the impulse and the action. And in that space, choice becomes possible. This is freedom. Not the absence of temptation, but the presence of awareness. Not the elimination of desire, but understanding what the desire represents. Not perfection, but consciousness. And once you achieve this, once you navigate your own inner world with this clarity, you become capable of helping others do the same. The medicine you carry is not advice. It is presence. The ability to sit with someone in their worst moment without flinching, without judgment, without trying to fix them, because you have been there. You know the way through is not around, but directly into the center of the pain. You know that healing does not mean the wound disappears, but that it stops bleeding. Jung believed that those who overcome psychological crisis have a responsibility to help others facing similar struggles. Not moral obligation, but natural consequence. They speak the language. They know the terrain. They carry the map that can only be drawn by someone who has made the journey. This is your purpose, emerging from your pain. The gift hidden inside the curse. This is why God speaks to certain souls through addiction, because those who survive it become beacons for everyone still lost in the darkness. And now, finally, you can hear. You have spent years in noise. The chaos of the addiction, the screaming of shame, the constant warfare between the part that wants to stop and the part that cannot. It has been deafening. In all that noise, nothing else could be heard. But now the volume is lowering, whether through exhaustion or surrender or grace. The noise is beginning to quiet. And in the silence that follows, something else becomes audible, something that has been speaking all along. Jung called this the self. Not your ego, not your personality, not your constructed identity, but the deeper organizing principle of your being, the part that knows who you are beneath all the confusion, the part that has been guiding you even when you thought you were lost. God speaks through this voice, not as commands from above, but as quiet knowing that arises from within, as intuitions you can no longer ignore, as truths you can no longer deny, as clarity about your path that becomes obvious despite years of confusion. The addiction was not God's final word. It was the opening statement, the method of getting your attention, the way of breaking through every defense you had constructed. But now that you are listening, now that you have been brought to your knees and made humble enough to actually hear, the real conversation begins. And what you discover changes everything. You are not broken. You were never broken. You were looking in the wrong direction, seeking in the wrong places, trying to satisfy a sacred hunger with things that could never fill it. The addiction revealed this mismatch. It demonstrated again and again that what you were reaching for could not satisfy what you actually needed. But now you know. And that knowledge is irreversible. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unlearn what you have learned. The path forward may still be difficult, but it is no longer invisible. You know where you are going now, not toward another high, another escape, another temporary relief, but toward integration, toward wholeness, toward the person you were always meant to become. This is what it means to hear the voice, to recognize that beneath all the chaos was meaning, beneath all the suffering was purpose, beneath all the destruction was reconstruction. That every moment, even the worst ones, even the ones that fill you with shame, was somehow necessary to bring you here. God speaks to certain souls through addiction because they need this particular kind of breaking open. They need this level of devastation to crack through their defenses. They need this intensity of suffering to wake them from the sleep that ordinary life could not disturb. You are awake now, blooded, exhausted, humbled, but awake. And the real work begins. Not the work of fighting yourself, but the work of understanding yourself. Not the work of becoming someone else, but the work of becoming who you actually are. Not the work of fixing what is broken, but the work of discovering that nothing was ever broken at all. You were always whole. You were always called. You were always loved. The addiction was simply the brutal method required to make you believe it.